So what's it like to drive a Class C RV? Well, come along with me here and take a ride. We've got a 2008 Winnebago Outlook, 29-foot Class C. I'm going to take a little ride here and I'll show you what it's like if you're curious. First thing I want to say is, unlike a car, you kind of have to check a lot of things before you take off. So that's a video for another day. Check your tires, walk around, make sure you've got everything ready to drive before you get going, and then you can go ahead and hit the road. I always check my tires with a tire gauge to make sure that they're at the appropriate pressure. And I think the best advice that I ever got about driving a Class C RV was a friend who told me, whenever you're driving an RV, driving a camper, driving a trailer, you've got to remember that you're not in a hurry. All right, so don't rush anywhere. You're going to take your time. You're going to drive a little bit slower. Now, a big truck like this anyway is not going to be particularly speedy, and that's okay. And especially because if you have to stop, unlike a personal car, under like a small SUV or a minivan or something like that, you need a much bigger stopping distance. So I'm always trying to leave significant space between me and the car in front of me. You do not want to get in a situation where you've got to slam on the brakes. I assure you, a small car will stop faster than you. The next thing you've got to think about is when you are turning is to understand that the tail of that RV is going to swing out a lot farther than a smaller vehicle. So always got to make sure you have enough room before you take that turn, and understand that whatever's behind that back wheel is going to swing out when you turn. But for the most part, after about a full year of driving, I've got to say driving the Class C RV is not too bad. I've learned how to prepare to drive, how to drive a little bit slower. And of course, another funny thing you've got to think about before you go anywhere is everything inside of the RV has to be put away, strapped down, closed, bungee corded, whatever, because, it's basically like driving your house around. Stuff could fly all over the place. If you have to slam on the brakes, you don't want a whole bunch of plates and kitchenware and all that fun stuff flying everywhere. One of the things I love about driving the Class C is just opening those windows, getting out on these backcountry roads, and just going for it. Now, in the couple years that I have been driving this Class C RV, I did do a few modifications to make the driving a little bit better. Primarily, I changed the steering stabilizer, which was a huge improvement on how the RV steers. That steering stabilizer is made just to hold the steering straight as you're going down the road. It was a big improvement from the stock steering stabilizer, and it really helped. Another thing to think about when you're driving a larger vehicle is, unlike a passenger car, when you're driving around, you probably rarely think about the height of your vehicle, but you need to keep in mind, what is the height of your vehicle as you're driving? Now, I've never ran into an issue where I approached something that was too short for my RV, but I know that that definitely can happen, so you want to be careful. Keep in mind how tall your RV is so you don't get stuck under a narrow bridge or something like that. The other thing that I always do is try to plan out my route before I get into the RV to make sure that, generically Google Maps isn't going to send me on some backcountry road that I'm not sure I want to be on. So you can do a little bit more planning. There are certain apps you can use to drive the RV. Garmin makes a GPS specifically for RVs to make sure that it doesn't send you down a road or under something too short for you to go under. But for the most part, I've just been mapping things in advance. And here we're at a nice campground in South Carolina, so we're pulling in, getting ready to set up camp. In the upstate of South Carolina, there are lots of campgrounds that are right on the lake, so this is another one like that. And hey, for $25 a night, you really can't beat the view. Perhaps the biggest help in driving an RV is that rear view camera. And the side mirrors also do a really good job. You've got a convex mirror that really shows you if anybody's sitting in your blind spot, so I'm using those frequently. I drive down the road with my rear camera on so I can see what is directly behind me. That's extremely helpful. And unlike a trailer, it's a lot easier to back up. But one thing to keep in mind, if you get in a tight spot, you're not going to be able to do a U-turn in a 30-foot RV. So that's something to keep in mind as you're going down the road. I've had a few situations where I got stopped and had to actually back up for a while and find a road that I could back into. Typically, whenever I'm backing into a site or backing into somewhere else, my wife or there'll be somebody else there with me that can kind of help me stand outside. Usually I'll park just outside the site. Before I pull in, I'll get out, I'll look around, I'll make sure there's nothing I need to be concerned about as I back in. In this instance, I'm actually going to back in myself. So if you've driven an RV or another vehicle like that and you've got some tips, let me know what you think. Overall, I'd say after a couple years, it's not too bad. The longest drive I've ever had is about 5 hours. Typically, I would hear people say don't go farther than 4 or 5 hours in one day. It is a lot more tiring to drive an RV than it is a smaller vehicle. This Ford E450 does have cruise control, but honestly, I don't use it a lot because it's pulling a lot of weight, and that engine is really going to rev up extremely high trying to keep speed, especially as you go up any sort of hill. I go ahead and let the speed go down so that the engine isn't revving really high.